All right. Welcome to this Frends webinar about future-proofing your business beyond BizTalk's horizon. My name is Asmo Urpilainen and I'm the CTO of Frends Technology. I have an extensive background from basically a technical point of view, so I've been doing development, architecture, including of course also sales and other types of agendas for almost 15 years now with integration. And I guess without further ado, we could get started with the webinar at hand. But just before that, let me mention that please, if you have any questions at any point during the webinar, use the chat functionality to ask them. We will answer them as best as we can. And just at the end of the presentation, we will also have a little bit of a moment for a more open Q&A. So if you'd like to have more dedicated answers or questions, you can save those for later as well. But off we go. So basically, as probably most of you know, Microsoft BizTalk server has now received its standard support end of date and also the end of life date for the entire solution. And Microsoft has set those dates to be 2028 for the ending of the standard support and 2030 for the entirety for the end of the support for the entire product. So that's what we're calling usually the end of life. And typically, of course, what we are asking customers and every one of you watching here today is why should you consider migrating now, as 2028 is a little bit away already, so 3 to 4 years away. But I think that should become quite apparent as we go into the presentation here. So 2028 is actually surprisingly close. So you might think 3 years, 2 years, 4 years, that's a long time for me to do something about this issue. But basically 2028 is actually quite close when you start considering the fact that efficient migration of the solution takes time. And we're especially talking about calendar time here. So whenever we are doing any sort of migrations from one solution to the other, the actual development or practical migration work itself doesn't take that long, but it's actually the time that we need to spend planning and executing basically the switch over from one solution to the other. So you are actually kind of like on a clock here if you have Microsoft BizTalk up and running, because you don't want to end up in a situation that in 2028 you suddenly realize that hey, the end of life is coming in 2 years, and then you're in a terrible rush, and that of course causes all sorts of problems from timetable perspective as well as cost perspective, but just purely from a business continuity perspective as well, since you need to be able to take that time well in advance to be prepared for the end of life. And the second thing I think why we are encouraging customers to do the migration now is that Microsoft is not actually offering any viable options itself for replacing BizTalk. So that actually puts us here at Frends at quite a unique position, and we're actually backed by Microsoft on this matter as well, that we are one of the only solutions on the market where we can actually reuse existing BizTalk components and be basically compatible and still stay within the Microsoft ecosystem itself. Thirdly, I think why it's a good time to start thinking about the migration already is that the community that Microsoft has built around Microsoft BizTalk is slowly fading away, and basically finding BizTalk developers nowadays can be extremely challenging. New developers are not being trained anymore for Microsoft BizTalk, so basically what's out there is all that it's going to be for the entirety of the lifetime of BizTalk. So you want to be also prepared from the perspective of personal dependency. So even though you might have a supplier right now or personnel who can actually perform BizTalk operations and do the development, that might not necessarily be the case in a year or two. And if you are unable to find any new personnel to replace or vendors to replace those existing parties, you are going to be in a lot of trouble. And finally, and of course, I think this is the most important one, is that, well, everyone understands that digitalization is accelerating. There's the AI boom going on, and I think it's bound to accelerate even more. And it's just a raw fact that the product development or the development of the BizTalk platform itself has stagnated, or actually already quite a few years ago, which basically means that BizTalk is probably unable to answer your organization's modern needs or needs of today, and especially if we're thinking about the needs of tomorrow or in a couple of years. Since BizTalk is not being developed anymore, you will basically be stuck, since if you cannot utilize your centralized integration platform to do what it's supposed to do and bring the value to your organization, how else are you going to make those digitalization initiatives work and happen in the first place? And basically, if we think now that we have to do the migration anyway, regardless of those 4 points I mentioned previously, you pretty much have two alternative paths to choose from. So the first one is sticking with the Microsoft strategy. And what that basically means is that you choose a solution to replace BizTalk that is within the Microsoft ecosystem and basically within the kind of Microsoft space. And that's, of course, typically what we talk about is being aligned in keeping this sort of like a Microsoft strategy, since you might have that already in place in other areas except integration, such as your ERP or cloud services in general. And basically what that means is that you're left with two options. So you could either go with Frends, since we are an integral part of the Microsoft ecosystem already, or you could go down the route of Azure integration services, which Microsoft is offering themselves to basically replace BizTalk. But the problem here with Azure integration services especially is that it's a stack of technologies and not a complete product like BizTalk was. And that's what's making it extremely difficult to find effective and efficient migration paths from Microsoft BizTalk towards the Azure integration services. And typically what that means is that you will have to build absolutely everything again from scratch without pretty much any sort of help available to make the migration more seamless, more efficient, and probably more risk-free as well. Of course, the other option is then leaving the Microsoft strategy, so ditching the Microsoft from the ecosystem when it comes to integrations. And of course, there's a multitude of competitors of Frends and other integration platforms we could choose from. But I think what we really want to highlight on this slide is that either you're going to keep your Microsoft strategy when it comes to IT in general, or you don't care about that and you can leave. And in both options, Frends is an extremely competitive and good alternative. But the one thing that makes us special is that when it comes to keeping the Microsoft strategy and keeping that Microsoft ecosystem close to the organization, I think Frends is probably the only viable option on the market currently to start with replacing BizTalks. And basically, to highlight that a little bit more, of course, we've done many of these BizTalk migration projects and delivered solutions for customers to implement the migration in the past, something like over 100 successful projects. And that has actually allowed us to gather these nice numbers that we're able to present to you right now, that what are the actual business benefits from migrating from BizTalk to the Frends platform. And I think it all boils down to less total cost of ownership, as well as then, of course, being able to develop much faster. So you could actually, if you're interested, head over to the Frends.com website and head over to the customer reference story section. So all of the numbers we're displaying here have actually been gathered from real life customer scenarios where we've been able to present these numbers or have the customer testify to these numbers when it comes to replacing old technologies such as BizTalk. But just to highlight basically how we can achieve, for example, the 75% less TCO after BizTalk has been replaced with Frends, is that it comes down to basically having to do much less maintenance work. And what we mean by maintenance work is ensuring that the platform is up and running at all times. And due to the fact that Frends has been developed as a modern iPaaS solution instead of a more traditional on-premises platform like BizTalk, we have been able to pay attention to things like intuitive monitoring, automatic, let's say, alerting, being able to visually see where the problem is, have understandable error messages, etc., etc., etc. So basically, the end result of that is that you do not have to be a technical expert or a Frends specialist in order to operate the platform, but actually, when it comes to BizTalk, you need to be a BizTalk consultant. You need to be a trained BizTalk professional to basically be able to do anything with the platform, and it all boils down to the complexity of BizTalk and the different ideologies that were prevalent in IT on the time when it was developed. I think the 90% faster time to resolution is basically another testament to the fact that the monitoring, transparency, and just the ease of use of the platform is so much greater that you're actually spending your time on the providing value instead of building, let's say, customized environments or moving solutions from test environment to production, configuring the same things over and over and over again. So basically, the maintenance work reduction and the faster time to resolution combined really highlight the efficiency of the platform after the integrations have been developed. But of course, we should not forget about the boost in productivity that we could bring to the table even before the maintenance phase of the platform, so after the solutions have been developed. So we actually have testimonies from customers where we are able to say that Frends is actually up to 55% faster in developing new solutions compared to BizTalk, and we have lots of nice customer reference stories around this, such as, for example, Petri Luurila, a CIO, CDO, who's testifying to Frends being able to basically beat out BizTalk in pretty much all scenarios. And I think the highlight, what Petri highlights here about the user-friendly interface and the low-code approach of Frends have really been able to practically speeding up their projects, cutting costs, and giving them better control. And I think a nice thing that Petri also highlights here is that they have an extremely Microsoft-centric ecosystem and strategy, and because Frends is such a good fit in that world, the transition or the migration from BizTalk to Frends was actually very smooth from their perspective. Another testimony from Alexander is a good example here as well, where basically I think Alexander highlights that the ease of use and easy to learn and basically the simplicity of the platform compared to BizTalk is an extremely big step up for us, as Alexander likes to put it. And I think what really kind of ties it all together is Alexander mentioning that the biggest downsides of Frends is that he wishes that all software would be as useful and user-friendly as Frends is. So just a couple of highlights and from our reference stories from being able to successfully perform the migration, bring those business benefits to the table, and of course have happy customers while doing it. All right, so next up, what we'd like to really showcase is basically the top 6 most important features and capabilities of Frends, and especially we want to highlight some of the aspects that we feel we are doing much better compared to, for example, Microsoft BizTalk and other legacy platforms. So basically, Frends in a nutshell. And to start things off here, I think the most important thing we often highlight, especially when comparing Frends and BizTalk, is that Frends is able to support all of your use cases, all of your integration and automation use cases, whilst BizTalk is quite limited to basically application to application or data integration scenarios. As opposed to with Frends, we actually have even a built-in API management capability, a full-blown API management solution directly within the platform, as opposed to BizTalk basically having no option for API management whatsoever. And of course, we also do those basic standard and I would say common integration scenarios just as good as, if not better, as BizTalk. So for example, managed file transfers, extract, transform, and load. those data integrations, application to application integrations. But to top it off, we at Frends, we can also then, for example, do even full-blown business process automation, which is something that you really wouldn't be able to do at all on, for example, BizTalk. So one of the key strengths in Frends is that we can take all of these different use cases, combine them, and use the best approach at the best possible opportunity or moment, whilst still only having a single unified developer experience and basically a single platform, single tool, instead of a variety of different tools bundled together. Next up, we'd really like to highlight something about the architecture of Frends. So compared to, for example, BizTalk, what we do in terms of architecture is something that we are calling a hybrid architecture, or actually it's even more, it's something that we're calling distributed hybrid architecture. And what this means from a practical perspective is, as you can see on the slides there, Frends is made up of two components rather than a single centralized component like, for example, BizTalk is. So we have what we are calling the control panel, and that's basically where you do all of your development work, monitoring, configurations, accessing the analytics, user management, everything you would expect where a human, regardless of the role of the human, wants to interact with the platform. That's all being centralized in that control panel, which is basically a modern web application that we are delivering as a service from Azure natively to you. But the key thing to understand here is that in that control panel, we actually do not execute any integration code, and we do not transfer any data between two or more systems. And instead, what we do is we attach what we are calling agents to that control panel, and the agents are now the ones actually performing the integration scenarios, performing the data transfers, and basically running the code that we have now built and generated in the control panel. Of course, the agents are then reporting back all of the data from a monitoring and logging perspective, so that then we can have that nice real-time centralized view on what's happening within our entire integration environment. And especially if we're considering and thinking about BizTalk migration now, this is a super good news for us from that perspective, because that basically means that we can provision Frends from the cloud, take a couple of those Frends agents, those remote integration runtimes, and basically deploy them to the existing BizTalk infrastructure to avoid, for example, you having to open up new firewalls or set up any sort of connections or jump through a bunch of security hurdles, because pretty much the agent can now replace the entire BizTalk server in its entirety, whilst just the management, development, testing, all of that stuff, that's being now centralized on the cloud side, of course, to make the use of the platform as easy and seamless as possible. And to top things off, we also now use the agents to basically establish the CI/CD pipeline or different environments within the deployment. So as opposed to BizTalk, where you typically would have a development server, maybe a test server, maybe a production server, which really have nothing to do with each other, we can actually deploy agents to 3 different locations, assign roles to those agents, say that, hey, you are a development agent, you are a test agent, and you are not a production agent. And Frends actually has built-in features to do all sorts of automation between these environments. So for example, deployments from development to test or production are just a single click of a button. No need to actually copy-paste any type of source code, source material, or solutions from one service to another. And this is just one of the things that we'd really like to highlight, which brings benefits in efficiency and productivity as compared to BizTalk, because basically all of that time you're not copying files from one virtual machine to another, you're saving, and of course that time can be better spent in developing new value and new solutions. And speaking of productivity, I think the approach that we take in Frends is really the key in that plus 55% faster development. And basically how we achieve that is that we use a visual low-code approach in all of the integration scenarios that we are developing on the platform. We use what's called the BPM and 2.0 standard. You might or might not be familiar with that, but it basically stands for Business Process Modeling Notation. And the entire ideology is that we have a huge library of these ready-made, basically integration connectors or tasks, as well as templates that are actually fully open source. So even right as I'm speaking, all of that is available on our website, tasks.frends.com, and in GitHub, so you can actually go and see how Frends is now executing all of those functionalities. And the good thing to understand here and what really makes us compatible with the Microsoft ecosystem is that all of those tasks, templates, connectors, they are pure .NET 8 and actually written in C#, which means that if you have any of, let's say, helper libraries or pieces of code lying around in your BizTalk, you can actually completely reuse those out of the box straight away as part of the Frends solutions. And of course, this visual low-code ideology and approach is something that then we support with automatic monitoring, the fully automated CI/CD pipeline with version control, like I mentioned earlier, and so on. Maybe one thing to take a note here also when it comes to perhaps thinking if BizTalk is a good, or Frends is actually a good option for you to replace your BizTalk, would be to mention that we are actually present in absolutely all industries, starting from hyper-secure utilities customers. You can see a couple of our reference customers on the slide here. We have over 1,000 enterprise customers currently. And basically, Frends is as good in any other industry as it is in any other else. So we don't really limit ourselves to a particular industry, and it's more about, for example, how are you building processes, how are you implementing the integrations, and of course, if you do have a BizTalk and probably you are spread across the different industries as you're listening to this. We can ensure that we, of course, have experience from your industry. We know the business processes that you're dealing with. We know the challenges that you're dealing with. And of course, replacing BizTalk should be a piece of cake, regardless of the size of your organization and the industry you're operating within. One thing that's extremely important nowadays, especially I think even more than in previous years, is security. So basically, if you're coming from a BizTalk world, you have had your BizTalk in what we are calling a bunker deployment. So that means that BizTalk has been deployed in an on-premise configuration with typically no access from the outside world to the actual BizTalk server itself. So you might have not necessarily had to worry about some of the security-related aspects that much yet. But especially if you're considering replacing BizTalk now, then things like security suddenly become much more important. So for example, if you're considering and thinking about, hey, let's go from BizTalk server to Azure Integration Services as an example, suddenly you have to deal with things like, okay, GDPR, is it all right for me to transfer my information to the cloud to being processed? Or suddenly, if you're considering some other solution which might have, let's say, hosting outside of the EU, that might make processing customer data in its entirety impossible. So we've actually been part of the, I'd say, the GDPR regulation and I would say the data protection wave from the very beginning. And the architecture we just discussed really supports this secure ideology that, hey, even though Frends is a cloud solution and we can do cloud-based integration for the benefits of the cloud, you actually also can still just remain in the similar on-premise environment where you have that native protection from, let's say, different types of external threats. You exactly know where your data is being processed because you have full control over the entire infrastructure. So that's what actually allows us to be part of business critical operations in, let's say, banks, healthcare, utilities, defense, different sectors like that. And there's just a couple of points or bullets that we've also listed that we do offer, let's say, for example, a huge variety of different security features that can be used to support your let's say security initiatives and ensure that the platform is as secure as possible. And finally, I think this is something that a lot of people really oftentimes forget, but that's something that's really close to our heart. So we Frends, like I put a heart there, but we love devs. So we actually do come from the BizTalk world many years ago ourselves. We know what, for example, are the pain points there, and we know how devs like to work. We know what are the best practices around building modern software, modern solution. We know which parts of the solution we want to automate, we should automate, and we know when we should give, let's say, the devs free hands to write some code, for example, to solve an issue. So we are really kind of also taking the approach that you should enjoy using the platform. The platform should feel as it's as something that it's boosting your productivity, it's making your job easier instead of the other way around, which I can, for example, from my personal experience, say that it's not always necessarily the case with, for example, BizTalk. Just a couple of things maybe to highlight from the slide here. We are an extremely active member in the GitHub open source .NET communities. We are part of the entire Microsoft Nugget ecosystem. So if you're familiar with what a Nugget is, you can take that Nugget package, use it in its entirety. That's something that you can straight away plug into Frends, and you have this plug and play capabilities and basically access to the entire developer community of .NET through that Nugget ecosystem and the integration of Frends into that Nugget ecosystem. And actually something that we are really proud of, and probably one of the only solutions on the globe, at least at the moment, is that we at Frends actually have 0% technical debt as of this moment, and actually everything on the platform is running on the latest .NET 8 LTS version. And that's, of course, something that we give our commitment to you, our customers and to-be customers, that we will stay basically on the edge of the technical development when it comes to the frameworks itself and basically the underlying technologies that Microsoft is developing, such as .NET as a practical example. So that's a little bit of a highlight of from a practical perspective on how Frends can actually be a really good option for you to replace your BizTalk solution, and maybe to just not leave it on my, or you don't have to just believe my words. You could go over to G2 and of course Gartner peer reviews. So we are actually of course in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. But what's more interesting to me is, for example, the G2 reviews that our customers are giving us, our competitors, and for example, even Azure integration services. So here I think we are really highlighting some of the things I talked about on the previous slides, where we are receiving absolutely great grades and reviews from our customers, where we are in almost all categories above 90%, where of course 100 being the best and the perfect scenario or the perfect world from the reviewer's point of view. But basically you can see here that we have excellent grades in all the green bars there, so the integration scenarios. We are talking about the ease of use I talked about, our customers are talking about, and of course meeting requirements, so being able to actually deliver the use case that the customer or the user is building are really high. And I encourage each and every one of you to head over to the G2 service and look us up and compare us to our competitors to see it yourself. We are actually beating them out in almost all of these categories. And I think the same thing applies when we take a little bit of a more practical approach. So here we have a couple of our competitors. And again, this is based on the G2 review data. You can go over to the website. You can see it yourself, what our customers are saying about us, how they are grading us, and of course the same applies for the competitors here. But for example, taking the average time to value, or basically the average go live time, how long does it take to get from zero to having something in production up and running, generating value? We are actually beating out the competition by quite a lot. and especially even if you're thinking about Azure integration services, like I mentioned, those being separate services that are being tied together into a single solution, we are actually more than half as quick as, for example, the Azure integration services, like I said. And again, I think the same theme when it comes to those reviews comes or applies to the total cost of ownership, where we are typically beating out the competition by quite a bit. So all right, so if that was a little bit of a deep dive into what Frends practically and actually is, and how we are now enabling different types of benefits for you compared to BizTalk, and of course other solutions as well. Maybe it's a good time to talk a little bit about the actual migration from BizTalk to Frends. So what we really kind of highlight here, and I think what we did already on the previous slides, is the compatibility from architecture point of view, the ecosystem point of view, and basically Frends just being the best parts of BizTalk kind of cranked up to 11 and still being able to basically be familiar to anyone who has used BizTalk. So we actually have really, really good experiences from users and customers who have had in-house BizTalk developers, and we have an online academy called Frends Academy. And basically through the academy, they've been able to onboard themselves as Frends developers in just a couple of days, because almost all of the knowledge, the integration competence, the understanding that they have can be directly translated into from BizTalk to basically Frends knowledge and Frends proficiency. So what we really like to title this is crafted with love for ex-BizTalkers, since all ex-BizTalkers we talk with who have used Frends are absolutely in love with the product compared to what they've been working with previously. So from a practical perspective, I talked a little bit about the kind of ecosystem and reusability aspect earlier, but from a practical perspective, what can we actually take from BizTalk and reuse as is on the Frends platform, since that's of course what makes the migration project so much more efficient compared to other alternatives. And just to list the top 6 here. So first of all, of course, we can reuse all of the XSLT mappings that you have created in your BizTalk, so all of your map files, including those with the functoids and those kind of Microsoft customized proprietary ways of extending, for example, XSLT. We support those in their entirety. Of course, the orchestration logic itself can be fully reused, so Frends has more than 100% coverage of the different orchestration capabilities that BizTalk offers. And actually, we do provide an automated AI-based toolkit to help you do migration and help you reuse these components. And a little bit more on that on the next slide. But of course, in addition to the mappings and the logic, if you have any C# code lying around in your BizTalk solution, like we mentioned, you can just simply copy-paste that. It works out of the box. You can achieve exactly the same thing. If you have schemas that you would wish to reuse, for example, for validation and help you out with message transformations, those can be reused in their entirety. And actually, even the port bindings, which contain passwords, usernames, the specific configuration for the BizTalk application to run, those can be also reused as environment variables on the Frends platform. And again, we have a tool that will help you do that migration from the environment or from the port bindings file to actual working Frends environment variable configuration. And lastly, but of course not leastly, the actual development environment is really, really important. So we talked about this in a couple of slides already, but just to reiterate and highlight that we are actually able to deploy those Frends agents to exactly the same operating environment you currently have with BizTalk, even on the same servers if need be. And what that means is that makes it much more efficient to basically take the platform into use and replace existing solutions, because then you don't have to reconfigure firewall rules, or you don't have to reconfigure, let's say, usernames, passwords, or access control to certain types of file share environments or database access. So we can basically mimic all of the, let's say, security work that has already been put in place for the BizTalk solution, and that's actually typically consists of quite a large portion of work if starting from scratch, especially if you have hundreds and hundreds of integrations in place. And basically, I promised to show you a little bit of a sneak preview here on the BizTalk Migration Toolkit. So basically, what this is this is an AI-based solution that's utilizing a couple of different large language models combined together and, of course, orchestrated, actually with Frends, hint, hint. And what the toolkit is basically able to do is showcased here in this video quite nicely. And basically the ideology is that you will have your source code for your BizTalk solutions, which typically contain those ODX files or orchestration files, map files, schema files. You might even have your production test development port bindings files. All of those files are something that you can plug into or give the migration toolkit, and basically using AI and quite a bit of quite complicated logic and code, we can actually first of all document all of this or the entire BizTalk solution, pick out the interesting things from the source code that we can then directly use as in our Frends solution, and of course also to generate a working BPMN graph or document in this case, which is basically something that you can plug into Frends directly and kickstart your development using the toolkit. So the goal of the toolkit is to basically get from a zero state, so you just have your BizTalk source code, to a state where you actually have a working skeleton or a frame of the integration process in Frends. You have working documentation which tells you what you should be configuring for that skeleton, and you also have basically all of the needed usernames, passwords, the configuration contained in the bindings files available for you to use in your development work. So we're basically skipping the documentation or the discovery phase when it comes to migration, and can purely start developing, so starting to take advantage of those productivity features of Frends. And of course, I think you can see a theme repeating here. So just as a final slide here to wrap things up here, how should you get started if you're really interested in the presentation and the idea of replacing BizTalk with Frends? So first of all, you should probably build a business case around the migration. So we know that you have to do the migration anyway. There is an end of life there, but it's much nicer for probably most organizations if they can build a business case around the migration, regardless of having to do it. And I think typically we build the business case around a TCO reduction, and of course being able to answer businesses' needs much faster with the new productivity features of Frends that Frends brings as opposed to BizTalk. So we can of course help you with that. We have tools and articles on how you can build the business case around the TCO and the productivity of the solution online. But basically that will result in a mental decision that you will like to go forward. You would like to actually start on this journey of migration from BizTalk to Frends. So from a practical perspective, the second step is then planning out the migration and the deployment. So for this also we have quite a lot of nice online resources available, meaning that you can basically create a plan of action, meaning that we decide in which order we are migrating the solution or applications on BizTalk to first of all have a minimum business disruption, so everything should work as seamlessly as possible. And typically also we want to kind of time these out, so we don't do a big bang approach, but instead we do more more of a gradual migration. And of course, planning the deployment of Frends around this is also very, very critical. So typically this means setting up the agents on, for example, the existing BizTalk servers. And that will mean that now you have a plan of action in place. You have the technical capability to start performing the migrations, testing them out, taking them into production use. And of course, that just leaves step number 3, which is then utilizing the toolkit that we provide to speed the migration work. And of course, implementing the solutions themselves. So building the actual finalized migrated solutions on Frends instead of BizTalk, deploying them into production, and of course, shutting that application down in BizTalk after it's finished and done. And of course, once you've repeated step number 3 enough times, and all of your applications have been successfully migrated, typically, we're talking about timeframes to, let's say, a couple of months to up to a year if we have a BizTalk solution with, let's say, 1,000 applications and a couple of thousand orchestrations. Then obviously that will take more time, but for more compact solutions, this can be done in a few months' time, end to end. And of course, we do offer services to help you along with every step of the way. But basically, after all of the applications have been migrated, then it's time for the fun part. So finalizing the migration, and basically what that means is that then you're able to get rid of the quite expensive server hardware you used to have for BizTalk. So Frends is actually having a much lower server footprint, and we don't need any sort of external licenses like Microsoft SQL Server. So typically you can get just quite a lot of savings just purely from the infrastructure point of view, but also from the license cost point of view, that then there comes a time when you can decide not to renew the BizTalk license contract anymore. And of course, that all contributes to number 1, so building the total use case or the TCO use case and the business case around the migration. And that's pretty much everything we had for you today. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. And if you're interested to learning more about the migration or Frends in general, please use the discovery call QR code here to book a demo or a discussion with us. We are more than happy to walk you through anything that we get discussed here today in more detail, maybe showcase the migration tool, discuss your needs when it comes to migration. And of course, then the second QR code, or I would say maybe the first QR code here, is if you just want to learn more about Frends without us being present. So all of the material is, of course, also online, and you should use that QR code to navigate to our website and start doing a little bit of investigation on your own. Thank you so much, and have a great day.